Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I'm Tyler Osby.
And today, we're back in the books again.
Oh my gosh, it's been years.
It's been actual years. The Ultimate History of Video Games Volume 2 came out this last week on August 24th, and we are starting it today. We'll be covering the introduction and Chapter 1. So if you haven't read it yet and you want to pause this podcast and read it, you could totally do that. That's the beauty of podcasting. But for now, let's get into it with the introduction.
If you're a new listener to the podcast, this is something we did at the start of the show when we first started. Was we sort of did like a book club reading of The Ultimate History of Video Games Volume 1 by Stephen L. Kent, which was very fun. I think a lot of people enjoyed that period of time on the podcast. We had a lot of fun with it. But even when even like 3 or 4 years ago when we were doing this, we've been doing this podcast for a while now. The book was old, even when we started reading it. Like, it was published in, I want to say, 2001, and so which is like right on the cusp of the sixth generation of video games. So basically the ending of that book is like, and who knows what's going to happen when the PlayStation 2, Xbox, and GameCube come out, and we were already like deep into Xbox One, PlayStation 4 era at the time. So it was an old book then, and so there's been a lot of time between the end of that book and the start of The Ultimate History Volume 2, nearly 20 years. And like so like I said, only the PS2 was even out at the time of the publication of the first book, and it hadn't been out for very long. So there wasn't much to be said about it other than like, yep, the PlayStation 2's out. And so, yeah, almost as much time has passed between now and the first volume as the entire first volume covered. So like the first book covers kind of like the late 70s of games into, the late 90s, basically, in like 2000, 2001. So it's like roughly a 20-year span, maybe a little more than 20 years. And it's been roughly 20 years since that book came out. So since then, like, video games have just exploded. We've seen the 6th, 7th, 8th, and now we're on the 9th generation of game consoles come and go. Everything is online now. Even single-player experiences are online now, even if it's only like achievements and trophies. Like, everything is social now. So much has changed. And so the introduction of the book we kind of talk about how games have changed over the past 20 years. In a way, like, the first book left off just as games were kicking into high gear. So like by the end of the 90s, they had proven themselves to be more than just a fad. And the first generation of lifelong gamers that grew up with arcades and the NES were entering adulthood now. And it was starting to become apparent that if games grew with our audience, they could continue making infinite money forever from lifelong gamers such as myself and Mike, because yeah, I know I've been spending money since I was a small child on video games. They're one of my largest expenses.
So much money. Just gone, but worth it? Well, sometimes. Sometimes it's not. And we'll definitely talk about those games later, too, at some point, I'm sure.
Yeah. And like video games, because lots of people saw video games as toys, right? And toys have always been this sort of like, they're aimed at a specific demographic. Like Batman toys are aimed at the like 6 to 10-year-old, maybe 12-year-old demographic of people who buy toys and play with them, and they don't try to grow up with those kids. The goal here is like the kids grow out of the toys. That's fine. New kids are coming in to play with the toys, and so people thought that some people thought that people would kids would be playing video games. They'd grow out of them just like they grow out of any other toy, and they would never really get to be much bigger than they were probably in like the mid 90s. But they were wrong, because games did start to grow with their audience, and that sort of legitimized video games, and they weren't toys to play with like they were until the end of the 90s. Technology grew, and so the consumers grew, and it became full-fledged experiences and not just like mindless diversions, although mindless diversions are still important, and they do still exist.
Now, Tyler, do you think that toys have also grown up now with people? Because I feel like in 2021, there's a lot of people our age that are still straight up collecting action figures. And we've seen a resurgence with like COVID too, like Pokemon cards, Magic cards. So I wonder if it's like not just video games, but a straight up cultural shift.
Yeah.
Of like the stuff that we all treasured in my case, in like the 90s, is now the things that I want to hold on to, Yeah. So
yeah, that's an interesting thing that I'm sure there's some book out here that covers it, but like this generation of like the millennials and probably later Gen Z will be like this too, really harbors a lot of nostalgia for previous eras. And maybe that's not new. I guess having nostalgia for like when you were a kid is not necessarily a new thing. But I think with and this is just me pontificating here, so, feel free to disagree. But I think with the rise of things like the internet, where things are preserved forever, or at least the information about those things are sort of preserved forever, that nostalgia that millennials have these days can be sort of realized, I guess. Like, you can go online and you can buy the things that you wanted when you were a kid, or you can at least read information about them. All of the cartoons and the TV shows, if you got like Disney Plus or something, like all that stuff is available just to stream now, which was not really the case if you're Gen X or a boomer growing up in like the 70s or 80s. If you had nostalgia for like something in the 50s, all you had was a TV to turn on, and you would just hope they were playing old cartoons that day. And so you didn't have those generations didn't have a way to realize that nostalgia in the way that we do. And so because of that, there's a huge market for selling us the things that have already been sold to us as kids. And I don't know if that's ever going to go away. I have a feeling that's just going to kind of always be a thing.
One, great use of pontificate earlier.
Thanks.
Okay. Two, to that point, I think that it's always kind of been here, but we never, like, I watched, I was on the road doing comedy, and I was watching a lot of Pawn Stars. And man, the people that collect like old Coca-Cola memorabilia from like the 50s to the 70s, like that was a thing, know? But I think the internet, like you just said, has made it so much easier that more people are doing it.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, like 20 to 30 years from now, if they're going to release like digital collector's editions of like a TikToker's like full library. So you could just watch like 2 hours of the have you checked your butthole guy just doing
Tom Cardy.
All of Tom Cardy's collection just all the way through.
You're probably right.
I could say that on a clean podcast.
Yeah, I think you can.
Okay, good. But I'm not censoring it, so there we go. But yeah, that's a great point. The internet just made it so much easier. Sorry, this was a little diversion, but
I think that's okay.
I'm curious about this to see how it affects the world later.
And I think that maybe not with Gen Z, but like whatever the name of the generation after that is, Generation Alpha, I guess, is probably what they're calling it. The people that are not born yet. I bet that there's going to be like a rebellion at some point where they're going to see the nostalgia that their millennials will be the boomers by then, that the millennials had and their parents Gen Z had. And they're going to like rebel against that nostalgia. And like, there's going to be a whole wave of just nothing being saved ever because people don't want to live in the past. That's my prediction for after Gen Z. I think Gen Z is going to take a little bit after millennials and still be, because some of them still have memories from before when the internet was a thing. But the generation after that will have no memory of anything before the internet. So,
dude, that's a real grim future, like sci-fi novel fodder right there.
Maybe people won't be stuck in the past and they'll be able to move forward too.
I mean, that's one thing that like, and this is more like, because I see so many silly jokes about millennials from comedians, and honestly, they're not even talking about millennials. They're talking about a different generation. They just don't know the right word for it.
Yeah, millennials are 40 years old now, guys. Like,
I'm a millennial. I'm a 33. Like, it's definitely, and I'm on like the later end of it. So, but I really am excited as like an older person 20 to 30 years from now to see what these generations of new people are like. Cause it's like, you like to think everyone's getting better over time, So it's like, and it's going to be different. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be cool. And that's like something that really excites me also, is just like wondering what if's going to happen. But anyway, we can get back to the introduction.
Yeah, we can talk about the book. So by the late 90s, games had made more than $5 billion, that's with a B, in revenue, which was bigger than movies at this point, which was kind of the old juggernaut of like entertainment money making. The book mentions the game Shenmue for the Dreamcast, which was the most expensive video game ever made at the time. It did not do very well. It was not a great game, although maybe there are people that would disagree with me on that. That's fine. But the point is, games had attracted big-time money now, and it wasn't just gamers making games for other gamers for the love of the game, like it was in the 90s.
That's so much game words. I love it.
There was much more like crossover stuff by this point. Like the 90s kind of had some cash-in stuff. We had the Super Mario Brothers movie, or the Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat movies. They weren't that great because they weren't really made by people who loved the games, right? They were made by people trying to cash in on the games. But those were just the beginning. The book starts to talk about the Final Fantasy movie, Spirits Within, which did not turn out very well, but it was one of the most expensive movies at the time, and that's because of how much confidence there was that name could carry such a big money-making endeavor. So people thought that a video game movie could do well. And it did have a lot of technical things that it did, like for the first time ever. They did this, like, they kind of did some of the first like motion capture stuff, I think, for a 3D movie, which is pretty cool. I mean, you still need a good story when you make a movie. Like, tech can't carry a movie the same way tech can carry a video game, I think. But it was pretty cool.
Dude,
So
this is kind of oops all tangents right now, but there was just a Twitter thread I read about how Avatar's legacy is being the most expensive movie of all time and not necessarily being a good movie. And that because Avatar, when that came out, was like 3D is crazy, you know, just like look how amazing this looks. And just like Final Fantasy Spirits Within, which was like mocap is everything, 3D modeling is everything. It's the same thing, just in different time periods.
Yeah. Don't they have like 10 more Avatar movies planned and they still haven't made any of them?
They have 4 sequels that have been like green lighted and they've been working on them. And that movie came out over 10 years ago, easily.
2009, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
It's like an old movie now. And it wasn't very good. Sorry. Like, if you love Avatar, that's fine. But
it was kind of one of those things where it would like beat you with symbolism. Like, oh, you see, it's called Pandora because they're opening Pandora's box and it's unobtainium is the name of the element.
Oh, that's right. They called it unobtainium.
Yeah. For some reason, that's what sticks in my brain that I can't get out. I can't remember certain phone numbers for people, but I'll remember unobtainium until I die.
Keeping unobtainium in where this is oops all tangents again, but keeping unobtainium in that script is like somebody wrote that script, James Cameron, I guess, thinking he would have some other thing. He would come up with a better name for it someday, and then just forgot to like Control F, find replace unobtainium, and just left it in there. And then when they made the movie, he was like, "Oh shoot, I forgot to." And they just like didn't say anything about it and just let it go, you know.
That's so funny. He's just like at the screening of the film, and he's just like, "Oh, whoops."
Ah, crap.
Oh, that's funny.
So back to the book, though. We're still talking that time period kind of between now and this is like a rough, like we're talking about the stuff that sort of happened between the first book and where this book kind of picks up, which is not a whole lot of time, but it's worth talking about. There was in the U.S. Joe Lieberman, who you may remember from our legal troubles a couple years ago, the episode we did on legal troubles. He was still on his campaign to censor video games. Congress there, always behind the times. They still probably still haven't accepted that video games were for more than just children, and that maybe it's okay for games to have more mature themes and content these days. They wanted video game retailers to enforce the game rating system that the industry had imposed upon themselves, the ESRB in the United States. But those voices were starting to be drowned out as more and more gamers came of voting age. And I tend, like, I'm okay with retailers, like, if they don't want to sell a game to like an M-rated game to a 12-year-old kid, like, I think that's fine. I don't get mad about that kind of stuff. But that's one of the things that Congress was, like, Joe Lieberman was fighting for in Congress around this time. There's a bunch of video game companies that went out of business, even though, you know, like, video games were still booming at this time. Some companies still didn't do well. The book mentions specifically Midway and Acclaim. They went out of business, unfortunately. Sega got out of the hardware business only a couple years into the life of the Dreamcast, which would have been, I don't think they talk about that in the first book, but it would have been like very shortly after the first book came out, or at least hit the printers. Square.
I think Sega's covered in chapter 2. We're going to cover that next week. So
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yes. Square had to join up with Enix, which was their rival for a long time. They were like kind of dueling JRPG companies, and then they combined, which was a great decision if you ask me. They're still a JRPG like Leviathan. But it sucks that they were in dire straits at the time and had to do that. The partnership did end up yielding some of the greatest games of any generation, I would say. Those Square Enix still puts out lots of great stuff.
Can I also just say how sad I am about Midway? Because that was like an early pinball company.
Yeah.
And that one I was like, and also I loved NFL Blitz. So then that was Midway. Mm-hmm. So selfishly. So I think I'm more in Midway is what I'm saying. And I hope other people do too. Yeah. Acclaim, not as much, but I think Acclaim did some really good games on Sega that I played a lot of. I think Earthworm Jim might have been Acclaim.
Yeah, I think so. They did. I don't think they did NBA Jam. Maybe they did NBA Jam, but I played a game called College Slam, which was the Jaybird of NBA Jam clones.
Oh my gosh, we got to do an episode on knockoff games. I don't know why we haven't done that yet. Like off-brand games. We should do that. It
was straight up just NBA Jam, but with college teams, and it was like licensed, and like it wasn't.
It wasn't cheap. It was just clearly NBA Jam, but for college.
It was just NBA Jam with copy paste. Like they just took the NBA teams out and put college teams in. It was still a lot of fun, and so a lot of the like mechanics in NBA Jam were the same. It was cool. But But at this point in time, Microsoft is starting to dip their toes into the gaming space again, because this wasn't the first time they like sort of committed to being a gaming company. Actually, the book tells a great story about how Microsoft had the option to buy a couple of companies for just $250,000 a piece. The story goes that Shane Kim, who is a high up at MSN Games Online, turned down the offers because, and I quote, "Why on earth would I spend $250,000 buying companies that make games I could create in my garage over the weekend?" Those companies' names? PopCap Games and Zynga, which are two of the largest game developers. They develop games and publish games now for casual audiences. So like your Peggles, your Bejeweled, Zuma. Zynga did...
Is it Plants vs. Zombies that PopCap did also?
I think PopCap also did that. Zynga does a lot of... They did like Mafia Wars. Remember when that was like really
popular? Oh, yeah. Zynga
popular?
Also did not the Jurassic World AR game, but they did like some Jurassic Park sim games that are on phones that I definitely played when I worked an office job in like 2015. So
yeah, they're real big on the phone games, especially
Thank you,
like
Zynga.
Yeah. So lots of fun stuff there.
Lots of microtransaction-y stuff though from Zynga and PopCap too. But hey,
definitely.
That is the business, I guess now.
And these were games for like a different audience. They weren't for hardcore gamers. They were for casual gamers who wanted to have some fun in their downtime, right?
Yeah. Does your grandma play Bejeweled? Well, you can thank PopCap and Zynga for sure.
My mom plays Bejeweled.
Hey, does she thank PopCap and Zynga every day?
Every day.
She boots up her phone, boots it up too. She definitely turns it off at night, right?
I love that story, though, about PopCap and Zynga because it really illustrates some of the changes that the industry was about to undergo, this sort of more shift to a wider audience and a more casual audience. Not that hardcore games were going away by any means. They would grow and get larger as well. But this new sort of like... I don't know what the right word is, but this new sort of trend of casual games was
I think trends,
starting
right?
to blow up. Trend is good. I'm sure there's a better word for it, but that's fine. So some of the incumbents, your Nintendos, your Microsofts, your Sonys, they were a little slow to catch on because they usually are. I'm reminded of how Steve Ballmer just shrugged off the iPhone. Remember when Apple launched or announced the iPhone, and some news outlet somewhere asked Steve Ballmer, "What do you think of the iPhone?" He was the CEO of Microsoft at the time. And he goes, business users are going to hate it. It has no real keyboard, so that means it's terrible for email. You can't put apps on it. He had all kinds of reasons why it was going to be this big failure, right? And he turned out to be super duper wrong. Like, just could not have been more wrong about the iPhone. But, he was free to make that prediction because nobody really knew if it was going to do well.
And if you listened to last week's episode, you know that Stephen L. Kent called it wrong too.
That's right. I mean, I did too. I didn't think the iPhone was going to be great either. Yeah.
Yeah, we were all.
It was so expensive. The thought of spending like $600 on a cell phone at that time was unthinkable.
Oh man, yeah, it's so funny. I actually got my first iPhone as a hand-me-down from my brother because he didn't like it. And he switched to like one of the ones that flipped open. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to like this. And then within a week, I'm like, I never want to go back.
Well, and to be fair, before like the first year of the original iPhone, before the App Store came out and it was just what was on the phone and like some web apps, it really wasn't that great of a phone. You couldn't even send picture messages with it, even though it had a camera that wasn't great even for the time. And so it was like really just this like email web browsing thing. The web browser was truly revolutionary. Like there was nothing like it on any other phone, but otherwise it was like not a great phone and it was very expensive.
Yeah.
So that first year was not great. Once the App Store came out, though, that changed a lot of stuff. Anyway, the point is, Steve Ballmer and other big game publisher folks knew a lot about the industry at the time, but they didn't know where it was headed, and they would suffer a little bit for that. But I do think Microsoft is especially interesting during this time period because this is when the Xbox launched. Now, Microsoft had done gaming-related things before. They released DirectX with Windows 95, which made game development a lot easier and more powerful for developers. They had their like Sidewinder line of hardware peripherals, like game controllers and joysticks and stuff. Although the quality,
I have not heard Sidewinder in years.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Wow,
you're welcome.
Oh my gosh,
I think the quality of those things was dubious at best, but they tried, and they would kind of off and on publish games for their own platforms, mainly just PC. The Xbox, though, was their first like full commitment to games. It wasn't just something that they they could throw out there and not support. They really needed to commit to it. And the book talks about how they'd done the Zone, and this was in like the mid 90s when the internet was like still very early. And they had made this thing called the Zone that was an early proto online gaming community that was like pretty cool. It was never really given Microsoft's full potential, like their full attention to reach its full potential, but like it was pretty cool. It was maybe a little bit ahead of its time. It was basically online gaming in the 90s, but it was mostly like card games and board games, stuff that could be played over dial-up, and then translating like the experience from playing with your friends in the real world to playing in a virtual world, which was kind of cool. It did have some cool stuff like early matchmaking for Age of Empires and playing that game online.
So
some
good.
of the first like matchmaking. So all that's to say that while the Xbox was like a brand new entry to the console race, it wasn't Microsoft's first foray into gaming. And they actually had a little bit of a leg up on the competition when it came to online gaming because they'd done the Zone. They already had some experience with doing games online. And so while I do think the Xbox was a little bit like right place, right time of like putting the Xbox out there with the right hardware to take advantage of, because the Xbox Live wouldn't come out for about a year after the Xbox had launched. But they thought ahead and they put the correct hardware in there so that every single Xbox had the right stuff to get online. So while the Zone might have been ahead of its time, Xbox Live I think was just on time, like perfectly there on time, miles ahead of anything Sony had to offer, and then years ahead of anything Nintendo whatever had to offer. Some say Nintendo is still catching up to this day. Legend tells Nintendo's online still kind of sucks.
Well, I mean, it's really great if you use the phone app, but I mean, I think the problem is you have to use the phone app to talk to people, and the sound quality is great, but then you're just like, why am I using my phone? It's like, it's just adding more to do the same thing that the other ones do. It's terrible.
Yeah, they must be doing that on purpose to like put some sort of barrier in place so that you get only people who really want to talk online and not just literally anybody.
It's probably their brand, right? Because they're so concerned about protecting children that play Nintendo games that they don't want to give them something that's, because I mean, look at the Xbox community. And to some extent, I think the Xbox community, it's fair to say, is probably a little bit worse than PlayStation, even though they're probably just the same as far as like terribleness goes. But Xbox notorious for it. Like you'll get random messages just out of nowhere of people being super mean to you for like no reason. And it's like, okay, well, I could see why Nintendo would want to make it super hard then, I guess.
Yeah, that's too bad. So Microsoft was able to use that leg up on online stuff to get way ahead of the competition when it came to things like digital downloads. They were kind of the first console with an online store. Like the original Xbox had some of that, and because it had like that massive 8 gigabyte hard drive, there was like some DLC stuff you could do there. Like the original Splinter Cell had some DLC. Halo famously had DLC map packs too that you would just have never been able to do that on the PlayStation 2 or the GameCube. And then with the Xbox 360, Sony and Nintendo both had to like scramble to offer something similar to what Microsoft was doing with the 360 because from like once the Xbox Live Arcade came out, like downloading games to the Xbox was like a thing now, like cheap games. And that's the other thing that they did was they sold games for like really low price points, like $10, $15 for like smaller games. And it was kind of thought at the time that gamers would rather spend full money on a full game rather than like kind of get these piecemeal smaller experiences. But Microsoft knew it would work because they'd been selling small games like that for years on the Zone. And so they knew that like this smaller market of cheap games that could be downloaded and didn't have to sit in warehouses and on the shelf at a Target or Walmart or whatever, like there was a market for that. And then, of course, the last great decision that Microsoft made before the launch of the Xbox was to buy Bungie, which, as you all know, is one of the greatest deals in the history of all gaming deals, maybe ever.
Easily.
Yeah.
Can I touch on something real quick, too, that's really cool about Xbox Live Arcade? Is that was like what brought indie games to consoles, too, which had never happened before. And I think... talking about like the other ones, if I recall, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Tyler, didn't Sony to compete with this make their online service free for a spell?
They did.
That's right.
On the PlayStation 3 it was free.
That's
and
right.
on PlayStation 2 it was free, yeah.
Because I remember that being like, that's how they're trying to catch up, is make their service free. But when they came out with that free service, they didn't have party chat like Xbox did. And that was like the big thing I remember this being like the contention point among my friends when we were talking about like consoles and arguing like you did. It was always like, we have to pay for Xbox, but they have party chat. And my friend's like, it's free on Sony though. I'm like, yeah, but you had to do the same thing. You had to like get a Bluetooth headset, buy one for your phone.
Yeah.
And like call your friend or whatever and play.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you could like, it didn't have the party chat of like going from game
voice
to game.
chat, right?
Yeah, it had voice chat, of course. You could do that on the PlayStation 2.
But there was a headset
like,
thing, wasn't there?
Yeah, and it worked with Bluetooth headsets, which was pretty cool. Like you didn't have to buy the proprietary Microsoft one.
I'm sorry. I try to be an objective game historian, but I think my Xbox fanboyness really shines through occasionally sometimes.
It wasn't like the PlayStation 3 had no voice chat. It was just like once you had to, it was handled by the game itself. So once you got into the game and like formed your party in like Killzone or whatever you were playing, like then you would have voice chat with your friends. But if you were like switching games, you would have to like drop voice chat and like set it up in the next game. Whereas on Xbox, you could do party chat and you could just be talking the whole time you're like setting up a new game or whatever. So it was like, it wasn't that big of a difference, but it was one of those things that's like, it's not a deal breaker, but it's kind of annoying,
Yeah. Also, party chat's great because you don't have to talk to anyone else but your friends.
That's right. That's the key. A big part of it too. Yeah, and it's a consistent experience from game to game. Whereas with Sony stuff, it was always at least in the PlayStation 3 era, if I'm not mistaken, it was however the game decided to handle it. Right.
Yeah.
So some of them did a really good job, others didn't, and it was just kind of whatever the game wanted. But I think before we go deeper into like the Xbox experience, we do got to talk about the console that kicked off the sixth generation of gaming, which is the PlayStation 2.
Yeah. So chapter 1 of the book starts with, it's called Sony the One and Only is the name of the chapter. And it starts with some pretty important statistics about PlayStation sales in like up to this point. And I'm just going to read straight from the book. This is on page 4. It says Sony shipped 4 million PlayStations in 1995, 9 million PlayStations in 1996, and 21 million in both 1997 and 1998. Nintendo sold fewer than 35 million N64 consoles during the console's 7-year lifespan. And the Sega Saturn never reached 10 million, end quote. So that's on page 4 of the book. So just to show you how dominant Sony was, it's pretty nuts how much they were doing that. But the other thing that's going on with Sony that's very important to realize is the rest of their businesses in the mid-90s were struggling. So in the book, they talk about how Samsung TVs, which actually I think we all know now is like being one of the better TV brands out there, they really took that over from Sony in the mid-90s. Apple ruined mini discs and Discmans with the iPod. Canon and Nikon took over camera sales from Sony. Nokia took phones from Sony Ericsson because this was a pre-iPhone world. Also, fun fact, I have still my Sony Ericsson phone.
I have one too.
I would describe it as a flip phone that's the size of a giant rock, is how I would put it.
Which one is it? Do we have the same
it's
Sony
like
flip
gray.
phone?
It came with like a weird TIE Fighter Star Wars promo thing on it. I got to find it, and then I'll take a picture and send it to you.
Mine is, I can remember, I can tell you the model number off the top of my head. It was a Sony Ericsson Z525A, I think is the Z525.
I don't have that.
We'll find
I
it.
guess I could. Okay, yeah, I can Google it later, and I'll let you know because I don't want to click on my keyboard. But yeah, so for Sony, like at this time, PlayStation is a big part of their revenue, and the man responsible for this is Ken Kutaragi, and you may remember his name because he actually helped Sony create the audio chip for the SNES, and now he was there to help design the next iteration of PlayStation after being the one to design the first PlayStation. Like he is the guy that made this happen and gave Sony these sales. It was his idea to make the PlayStation 1. Also, it's important to note that there is some time spent in the book talking about how very, very hard he was to work for. So we're going to talk about that in a bit too. But Ken Kutaragi is called like brash, temperamental, and outspoken in a society that taught the nail that sticks out gets hammered down, end quote, is the exact quote from the book. There's actually another quote too from Phil Harrison, who we're going to talk about in a bit. Phil Harrison, just to kind of clear it up for you, he was actually the the VP of third party relations, research and development. So he was like the gamer guy. And this is his quote on page 6 of the book talking about working for Ken Kutaragi. He goes, quote, Ken was it wasn't like he was a table thumping shouter, but he definitely got passionate about things. I remember one argument with him about something which to this day I can't remember the details. It's probably insignificant. His way of finishing the argument was to say, well, if you think that, then you must resign. It was very emotional way to say, I don't want to have this argument anymore, end quote. Like he would like threaten to fire people constantly and like say people are fired and then take it back. But so Kutaragi is a controversial figure among Sony executives. And now that the PlayStation was so successful, he has even more power than before. He's the reason that Sony is afloat in the mid 90s. We're going to talk about it, but Sony, the PlayStation was like 40% of Sony as a company's revenue. Damn. And this one guy is responsible for that. So now it's time for the PlayStation 2. And the first reveal of the PS2 was on March 1st, 1999, during a press conference at the Tokyo International Forum. And there's a great story in the book with that while this conference is like a glowing success and like everyone's amazed by the tech demo, they talk about the 3D modeling being like the best at its time. Behind the scenes, this was absolute chaos. Like 48 hours before the event, Phil Harrison walked with engineers, walked in and worked with engineers to translate essentially like technical speak to a press level presentation because he's like their VP of third party relations, right? Mm-hmm. And this quote from Harrison on page 8 of the book like explains kind of what's going on. He says, quote, I arrived in Tokyo 3 days before the event. I walked into Ken's office and I said, hey, I just arrived. If you want me to have a look at the slides that you're going to be showing, I'll happily correct the technical information and make sure there's consistency. He looked at me and he went, slides? Oh, that would be a good idea. End quote. So they had nothing ready for this entire presentation. But there is a moment that they nail like the big public presentation. And I actually didn't write this down, but Ken Kutaragi actually has an hour-long presentation after that, like a very small press conference where he goes over the tech specs and explains some stuff. And they really get into like the details of the console. So they really wowed everyone with like the big Apple style showcase, with the tech demo on the big stage. And then in their smaller press conference, they really appealed to like hardcore fans that are like, I want to hear about polygons and stuff like that, those kind of folks. So that presentation went really well. But I want to take a little break right now to give some props to this book. And I'm going to be doing this a lot over this series because one, it was really cool of Stephen L. Kent to have him on the podcast, but I love these books because it is mostly like real juicy corporate drama. And I think it's really great. And like, I watch the show Secession. I know Tyler does too.
Oh, love it.
And it definitely feels like that right now. And this is what stood out to me the most. So Nobuyuki Idei, it's Idei, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He just became CEO of Sony in 1999. He actually took credit for standing by Kutaragi, even though Idei voted to abandon the original PlayStation originally. So he claimed, and I'm sure that I'm preaching to the choir here, like if you've listened to this much of this podcast, but corporate culture in most of the time is pretty, I don't want to say, I'm saying bad for video games is a big generalization, but I think that's fairly true. Like you see people make bad corporate decisions all the time, but we almost didn't get a PlayStation. Isn't that crazy to think about?
Wow. I was going to say, what's crazy to think about too, so we almost didn't get a PlayStation. What kind of stuff do you think we didn't get because it actually did get crushed that we never heard about? How much cool stuff could there have been?
Yeah, I mean, I think, honestly, my prediction would be we would live in a more Sega world. Like, it would still be Sega and Nintendo, because I think Sega would have been the only other option besides Nintendo, and Nintendo would have been dominant, and I think Sega would have been the third part. I mean, I don't know if they still would have survived, but I think they possibly could have survived more if PlayStation wasn't there to, like, fill in, you know? They could have stuck with their whole, like, we're the cool console guys, where I think PlayStation kind of took that over. The cool console image.
I think you're right.
But yeah, I mean, without the PlayStation, I would argue like the PlayStation is so influential to how games are now. I don't think we'd have the Xbox in the same capacity if we didn't have PlayStation beforehand, for sure. So Stephen Kent actually has a really great paragraph in here that I wanted to read because I think he just sums up like this whole corporate stuff beautifully. He says, quote, "There's nothing new or unusual about a top executive revising history and taking credit for projects they actually opposed. It's fairly standard behavior, particularly in Japanese corporations with a cultural mandate to respect senior officers. Looking back on, quote, A Glimpse of the Future, Phil Harrison observed, "Success has many fathers. Failure is an orphan." And I thought that was a really good quote.
That's good, yeah.
Because, and so essentially, this is important, though, because Kutaragi, being like the original bad boy of Sony, publicly challenges Hide's statement, says what he's saying is not true. He voted to abandon the PlayStation, and saying the only person to support him was Sony chairman Norio Oga, which in Japanese culture essentially is like waging war. And anyone else would have been fired. But because the PlayStation was Kutaragi's and that was 40% of Sony's revenue at the time, he got away with it. He was able to kind of break corporate culture, which I think is really cool. And that's a really cool moment in this chapter, is explaining how the politics of this works. But the entire point of this for me is Ken Kutaragi is kind of a video game hero, minus his terrible office behavior, as being angry and stuff. But in the book, Jack Tretton, who is another person that worked at Sony at the time, definitely compares him to Steve Jobs. And I think that's a pretty decent comparison. I don't know a lot about Steve Jobs, but I do feel like Ken Kutaragi is very influential to how we have video games now in that same capacity. And he spoke his mind and he was passionate about what he did. And I know that's kind of a Steve Jobs thing too. So I think it's a good comparison. But
yep.
There's more on this in the book. So definitely read the book. And there's a quote there from Jack Tretton that will end a couple paragraphs on that. That's really good. But I want to talk about that before we get back to the machine itself, the PlayStation 2. So we talked in our PlayStation 2 episodes that were not on the book about how people thought it was a supercomputer at launch. Remember that? Government officials.
It probably technically was by some sort of benchmark that is probably way outdated now, but yeah.
Yeah, governments were nervous about the PlayStation 2.
Yeah, because you could launch missiles with it or something.
They're like, you're going to play Ridge Racer 5 and control my car. That's what they thought. Okay, but I wanted to touch on that again because we learned in the book that Kutaragi actually had some pretty lofty goals. He says, quote, he talked about recent studies suggesting that playing piano might stave off the effects of dementia and said he hoped his next generation PlayStation might do the same. So in that way, he's kind of not only this video game guy, but he's also trying to better the world, which I thought was really cool. And the launch of the PS2 was bananas. Japanese game launches in particular, we'd all know had been huge up until that point. The SNES shut down Tokyo on November 21st, 1990. And the PlayStation 2 release on March 4th, 2000 was even bigger, to the point where the Japanese government actually stepped in. And they requested that retail stores start handing out PlayStation 2s at 7 o'clock a.m. so as to avoid a national traffic jam, which I'm pretty sure is kind of what happened during the Super Nintendo release.
Yeah. They were never again.
Yeah, they shut down Tokyo, essentially. So, and just to show you how much better this worked, by 9 o'clock a.m., there were no lines because there were no more PlayStation 2s left.
And no traffic. It was a dream.
It was a dream. It was perfect. They did it. But to give you an example of what this is like, the lines at a Laux, it's LAOX retail store, were 4,000 people long. And that store in particular only had 200 units to sell. And a lot of those were pre-orders.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So it was really
disappointed people.
Very disappointed people. Very big release. But let's briefly touch on some of the great games that came out and the features for the PlayStation 2. This is just in Japan, by the way. And you'll notice something about this list. The games that came out at launch were Ridge Racer 5 and Dynasty Warrior 2. But the important feature, was that many consumers chose the PlayStation 2 over others because the PS2 plays DVDs. You know DVDs, Tyler.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
PS2
man.
didn't need games. It had movies.
Yes, right. And so this is breaking a codex rule, I think. Because our codex rule, I feel like set by history, is that if you got no games, you're not going to do very well.
Well, it wouldn't take very long for PS2 to get games, too.
That's the other thing, too. They had a bunch of releases come out in 2 or 3 months later. But at launch, the PS2 got no games, and it's still sold out. So Sony knew what they were doing when they relied on DVD sales. It was kind of pre-planned
It was
ahead.
also cheaper than buying a DVD player.
It was, yeah, which is pretty weird to think about, right?
Yeah. PlayStation 3 was similar with Blu-ray. It was just at the time, Blu-ray players were more expensive than buying a PS3, so...
Did we talk about the Blu-ray versus HD DVD battle that Sony and Xbox or Microsoft and Xbox Microsoft and Sony had? Because that's kind of a thing that would be fun to take some time on, I think, because that was like a big deal when that happened. The PlayStation had Blu-ray, and then Microsoft Xbox 360 had an HD DVD player that was a side peripheral, right? It was like
they really did that one halfway. It was a real half measure for Microsoft because there were no games that could run off of HD DVD. So like that was a big part of the Blu-ray thing on PlayStation 2 was like there will be no multi-disc games because we have 50 gigs here. It's plenty of games. No game will ever need more space than that. And which is not true anymore, but was true at the time. And Microsoft was still stuck with DVDs, and you couldn't play any games off HD DVD. So
yep, it was a very weird time.
So there's no reason to buy one because, yeah. Were you going to watch movies?
Tyler and I both have a mutual friend, though, that does collect HD DVDs, and he got them for like $1 because everything was failing. He has so many movies.
They still look great.
Yeah.
I have an HD DVD of the movie Serenity. I had a computer with a combination HD DVD Blu-ray drive, which was pretty cool.
Nice. So, so we just talked about Japan's release of the PlayStation 2, but now let's look into the USA a little bit. So Sony Computer Entertainment of America was pretty flashy in the 1990s. They mentioned in the book that they actually had Prince just attend their E3 party. He didn't even perform. He just attended in 1996. And then they had a full-blown Foo Fighters concert in 1997, just at their E3 party. But behind the scenes, they had like a very like professional, hardworking team. So now we're going to go through the team here. So we have Kazuo Kaz Hirai. It's just K-A-Z. He is the CEO of the Sony Computer Entertainment of America, and he moved up the ladder pretty steadily since 1995, and he attended American school in Japan and spoke perfect English with no accent after spending his teenage years in Toronto. And so he's the CEO. Andrew House was a Welsh-born manager of SCEA's communication. He spoke perfect Japanese and could read kanji, which is very rare. And he joined Sony Corporate in 1990. So now the man I've been quoting a lot, Phil Harrison, British-born VP of third-party relations, research, and development, and he's like the big gamer of the group. Like more than anything, he's like knows games, which is good because his job, we're going to find out in a bit, is essentially to talk to developers and get them to make games for the PlayStation 2. And then Jack Tretton, who is the Tretton, I always want to say put an N in there, but it's Jack Tretton, Tretton, is the VP of sales. Born in Boston, Tretton is known for being so direct. He's actually known for saying in response to why the PS3 isn't backwards compatible, quote, "I would like my car to fly and make breakfast for me, but that's an unrealistic expectation," end quote.
But the launch PS3 was backward compatible.
The launch one was?
Yeah, with PS2 and PS1 games.
Oh, well, I'm pretty sure that's what it says in the book. Did we just find a weird thing?
Maybe. Well, the PS4 definitely wasn't backwards compatible. Well, still isn't. The launch models of the PS3 could play all PlayStation games. After a couple of years, they took out the PlayStation 2 functionality, but all PS3s can play PS1 games.
Oh, maybe it was that moment then when they took away it or something. I don't know.
Well, and that's a silly thing for him to say. It's not unrealistic because it happened already. You're just taking it away now. It's not unrealistic.
You're putting Jack Tretton on blast, and I love it. Okay, so that's the team. We have this crack team of people making the PlayStation 2. Now, all these folks had one thing in common, and that was they had to work for the quick-to-fire Ken Kutaragi. So Kutaragi is working with this team directly, and he was known, as I said before, to fire people and then like take it back the next day, to the point where Jack Tretton says, quote, "If you didn't get fired by Ken, then he didn't respect you." Now, the major difference between Sony and the other two big console makers, Nintendo and the soon-to-be Microsoft, is SCEA was given way more leeway in decision-making. Like, we've talked about it before, but Nintendo of America was constantly under the eye and pressure of Nintendo in Japan. And Microsoft didn't really apply to the situation because they were just one company very much. And we're going to talk about it later on in the book, but I'm pretty sure there were definitely some questions about the Xbox and should this happen early on in design of it. And we'll talk about that more later on, I think even next week, because they talk about the Xbox and then Nintendo and Sega a little bit. So, but Sony was the big difference when it didn't have as much like corporate eyes looking on them while they did this. So when Kaz Hirai ordered 1 million units for the American PlayStation 2 launch, no one really batted an eye. And meanwhile, Harrison focused his efforts on making new games for the PS2, which was hard because, as we talked about in our previous non-book PS2 episodes, the PS2 was pretty difficult to program. Here's actually a great quote in the book about it. Quote, "Around the industry, frustrated programmers started joking that the only emotion that the emotion engine gave them was despair."
Oh.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty funny. So luckily, though, there were some developers that were willing to work with PlayStation 2 because the PlayStation 1 was such a success. So remember those 1 million consoles that Harai ordered I just mentioned? Well, Rick Doherty, of an MSNBC reporter, found out they only had half as much at launch. He reported that, and he was correct. Sony was behind in production. They ended up planning to launch 500,000 units. And then they release 100,000 more units a week after launch until January 1st. That's how they were going to cover the orders instead of having like a bulk 1 million to start. In the end, though, I mean, they had a pretty happy accident because they sold out of all their 500,000 consoles on launch day, and they probably would have sold out of 500,000 more if they had them. Like, people had PlayStation fever, so the pre-orders meant that most of the consoles never even made it to the shelves. So it kind of made this demand, which we're kind of actually seeing now, I think, with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, where it's like people are excited because they want to get one, and it's like a rare thing.
I remember this period of time because it was the first time that I had ever really encountered like this new thing being completely unavailable because stores just straight up didn't have it.
Oh.
Like, of course, that would happen every generation after that of video game stuff. But like usually, if you wanted something and you had money for it, you could go to the store and get it, right? But when it came to the PlayStation 2 specifically, and many other game consoles later, I would learn to find out. I was also 10 years old when the PlayStation 2 came out, so this is just young Tyler learning a lesson. But I just remember being like, wow, you can't get this even if you have the money and can get to the store. They just don't have them, and that like blew my 10-year-old mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think we got a PlayStation 2 kind of later on in its life cycle, which made it so I didn't really have to experience this. But yeah, PlayStation 2 is a really cool machine. Like, everyone knows it. And I think is it still the best-selling console of all time?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, because they kept making it for so long. But back to the launch, though. The biggest difference between the PlayStation 2 launch in America and Japan were the games. So Sony Computer Entertainment of America had 29 launch titles lined up.
Dang. PS2 had games.
PS2 had games. In America, it had games. Now, some of those launch titles included SSX, NHL 2001, also SSX, great games. Great games. Madden NFL 2001, Ridge Racer 5, Tekken Tag Tournament, Midnight Club, and MotoGP. And I want to take a side note because Midnight Club games are great, and I feel like that's a forgotten franchise, and I have to cover it because I played a lot of those games, and they made me feel like a street racer. So they had that, like, when Fast and the Furious was coming out, and I was in high school, and it was really cool, Midnight Club was the game we would play to feel like we were street racers.
Yeah. Good news. Fast and the Furious movies are still coming out.
Yeah, I know. I just don't feel like a street racer anymore because they don't have Midnight Club games.
They're definitely not about street racing anymore. They stopped that after like the second movie.
You know what they're about now?
The third movie.
You know what they're about now? Family.
Family. Going to the movies.
All right.
They're about going to space now.
Yeah, they do that, huh? I didn't see the newest one. So.
I love that movie. It's not good, but I love it anyway.
There's a lot of movies like that, and I think they're great
just
for
fun.
that reason.
Yeah.
So that's the Sony launch. The chapter ends with somewhat of a good problem for Sony, which is they didn't have enough consoles to meet demand. And because of the manufacturing problems they had, a lot of people over the globe didn't get their PS2 when they pre-ordered it at launch, which is kind of a bummer. But Sony really cranked it up in 2001. So in 2000, Sony shipped 1.4 million consoles worldwide. In 2001, a year later, Sony shipped 9 million consoles. So they covered all those pre-orders, and they would keep on doing this until the end of the day, until the end of its life cycle. Like Sony is, the PlayStation 2 has so many manufactured all over the world. You can get one real cheap, I feel like now still. So next week, we'll touch on the other players in this, though, like Microsoft and Nintendo, and we'll also talk about the death of Sega. But before we go into the other segments, I wanted to talk about, this book is, I already said it, but we had some people on Discord talk about reading along, and we want to make sure that we tell you what's going on. So we're going to be reading chapters 2 and 3 for next week, and we're going to try to keep you up to date on like what the next episode's going to be when we do one, so you know what to read if you're the kind of person that wants to read along, and also treat it more like a book club. And in that sense, I think it would be really important for us to get some emails about like the book itself and like what you think.
And join us on Discord too to talk about it.
Yeah, because I might even make a channel on Discord that's just about this book, because I know people like really like the book club format. We got that feedback before we had Steven on, and before like we were doing the episodes just on games that we were interested in and stuff. And if that's the case, then I feel like we should really treat it that way and talk more about it. And I want to hear from other people, because we do kind of jump around. Like, we're not reading the book cover to cover and telling you what that is, because then we'd be an audiobook and that would defeat the purpose. Yeah. But we want to hear what you think and what moments you like. And so, so codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com is where you can email us your thoughts, and we want to hear from you. And now, Tyler, what you been playing?
I've been playing 2 games this week: Final Fantasy 14, Final Fantasy 10.
That's a lot of Final Fantasy.
Yeah. I haven't been playing as much 14 because I finished the grind to get the weapon that I was going for. Not the relic weapon. If there's any Final Fantasy fans out there, I'm not grinding out the relic weapon yet. But I did get a different weapon that I wanted that's eye level 530, so it's like basically the same. I got that, and I sort of my interest kind of dropped a little bit. Although I do have some other stuff I want to unlock, so I played a little bit yesterday, and I might play some more tonight. But I've been sucked into the story of Final Fantasy X right now. I love that game. I played it, probably when I was like 15, probably in like 2003, 2004. So maybe I wasn't quite like 15 years old, but I loved it then, and I'm having a lot of fun revisiting it. And the PC version is okay. It's an okay port, but it does have speed up, so like you can grind out levels really quickly, which is nice. But I'm loving it. So that's kind of it. I did update my Trello board, so it's a little bit more up to date now. I feel like there was something else. Oh, I picked up Bravely Default 2 because it was on sale for Switch. I got it for like $30 on Amazon, so I might play that soon. But otherwise, yeah. What have you been playing, Mike?
Oh, man, Tyler. First of all, I just looked at the phone you sent me, and it's very close. Like, okay, very similar shape. Mine was very actually the button. It might have been the same. It was definitely like a Z something, because very similar to this model, but even bulky. Think bulkier and squarer.
Oh, I want you to find this now.
It's somewhere around here. I swear I kept it because I was like, it was one of those things where I'm like, I should throw this away, but I don't even know what to do with it. So I will give you a phone update. But I was playing a lot of Zelda Skyward Sword HD. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to give Hades a try because it's on Game Pass. And I am now obsessed with Hades. I cannot stop playing it. It was like, I took a break this weekend because I was gone, but I missed it while I was gone. I'm excited to jump back into it again. Hades is so fun. And I love it because it's the roguelike, right? Where you die and you lose all your progress, but you still get some like permanent upgrades at the like hub, the house of Hades, essentially your dad's house, because you're the son of Hades in this game. But the best thing also about this, and what I think they do so well, is when you die, you don't feel punished because you just get more cool story stuff after you die.
Nice.
And it's really cool. There's like lines for everything. I've never gone back to the house and had a new thing happen. And you can give people gifts, and then they give you gifts back. So you like learn about all the different gods and what they do. And then you're getting like help from the Olympians as you go along. It's a really cool game. I don't really play, like, I played Dead Cells. That was a roguelike, the last one I played. But this is just on a whole new level of just fun. And I want to keep playing it. I really want to beat it. So, and I've gotten to the 3rd level now. It's pretty hard, honestly.
Nice. Like, I did play one run of it after you were talking about it the other day. And I was like, this is cool. But then I put it down.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're in a Final Fantasy mode. You gotta focus in. You gotta zone into that. But I played Hades. I'm back on the Destiny train a bit because I got real hyped for that thing that they were doing. And I played that kind of while I was out of town because I just had my laptop with me, and that was fun. New season's all right. I'm really looking forward to all the changes they make, and especially the whole thing where it's like you build weapons. So it's like you're a Jedi building your glaive instead of a lightsaber, which is really neat. That sounds fun. Yeah, so that's a game that's like the one I always crawl back to, even when I think I'm done to it. And then I also played my buddy got a PC for the first time. And so I played some Valorant with him, and he'd never played Valorant before. And that was really fun. But we also learned we're both just trash can potatoes at that game. We're just really bad at it. It's fun though. Like, he had a good time, and I was happy because he's like going to be a new gaming PC buddy with me. So I also downloaded, like, we played Modern Warfare, Warzone, not Modern Warfare, but Warzone on PC too, and that's pretty fun. Like, it's just a fun game. Like, I feel like I like the casual, even though some people probably don't treat Call of Duty casually. Like, Warzone to me is like, oh, you die, you just queue up again. Who cares? Like, we're all just chilling and having fun, and I like that. Kind of like Apex was for me. But both those games can get very sweaty if you try. But before we start with emails, I have a review, and I don't want to forget to read it. Can I do the review right now? Mm-hmm. So this is from Simon Belmont's secretary. 5 stars. Tyler and Mike, great job. Awesome. And then it cuts out. I am a longtime Spotify listener, which for some reason does not have a rating system. I am finally getting around to rating this show on this app I don't use. If you are at all interested in the history of the world's greatest art form, sorry, polka music, Codex is the show for you. It starts off with straightforward history of consoles and game development up until the mid-2010s, and it just gets better from there. Throughout this series, you'll get the history of games, series, and even genres. There will also be discussion episodes on some of the more philosophical aspects of gaming, book discussions, and always entertaining engagement from the wider Codex community. Mike and Tyler are both excellent hosts. Mike keeps things light and often provides his reactions in real time. Yeah, that's true, and to the dismay of others, I'm sure. And I'm thankful that they keep him in. Thanks for keeping me in, Tyler. And Tyler plays things more straight, and I would listen to him narrate my biology textbook if I could. Tyler.
Wow.
Future career, biology textbook narrator, Tyler. They've also made an incredibly entertaining community out of this pod where everyone has very lukewarm opinions about games. Not in short, this show is definitely worth a listen. Keep up the great work, guys. Thank you, Simon Belmont, secretary.
That's nice.
Yeah, I like it. I that's a very nice review, and thank you for doing that. If you want to leave us a review, you can just do it on Apple Podcasts. Honestly, that helps a lot. But if you just want to tell your friends about us, that's great too. We just like to have people listen, and we're both blown away and super happy and grateful that people listen. So thank you for doing that. And we're also grateful that people send us emails, and we got some emails to read today.
Yeah, I can read an email here from Kyle.
Perfect.
This email has the subject, FIFA versus the world. Hey guys, Kyle from Wales again. Sorry about the long email last week. Promise not to waffle on too much this time. I'd like to bring up a topic from a previous episode about gaming cultures in different parts of the world. I've lived in several towns and cities across the South Wales coast, and from my experience, there's 3 basic divides in gamers here. Your general, will play anything gamers, your trend followers, Call of Duty, Fortnite, etc., and your FIFA players. I used to be able to attend midnight launches for games such as Destiny, main series Pokemon games, Last of Us, Batman, etc. But in the last 5 years, options for midnight launches have diminished. That is true. It's just not quite as exciting when it's like you're just downloading the game now. You're not like getting anything when you go to launch. You know?
that we could do like a top 5 midnight launches of games. That would be fun. Like
Ooh,
hyped launches. I'm writing that down.
Yeah.
That would be a good idea. Okay, I'll write that down.
Yeah. Kyle says, except for FIFA, there's always at least 3 stores hosting midnight launches in most cities here. Playing FIFA is considered acceptable and cool, and getting the latest Mario isn't. Even in schools, children boast more about their latest FIFA Ultimate Team pulls than how far they've gotten in Breath of the Wild or even their latest dance from Fortnite. FIFA transcends gaming as a hobby here. It's socially acceptable for players of all ages and from all walks of life to play FIFA. But, sadly, FIFA doesn't cultivate a positive community. I've seen people attacked in the streets over a loss the night before online. Whoa, that's wild. It's a sad state of affairs. Sorry to take the tone down a notch. How about a question to lighten the mood? If you could be transported into any game universe and be your own version of the main character, what would it be? And why would it be Red from Pokemon Red? Spider Butts, Kyle.
Honestly, I think about that a lot. Like, living in a Pokemon world would be super happy all the time. You know, it's a very like utopian society.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
Yep.
Because the Pokemon, I think, want to battle, right? So that whole like, because that was the weird, I know that's like the running joke that people make is like, it's like a weird, like, I mean, I guess you're right. Maybe they don't. I just kind of,
or do we just assume they do?
I just kind of assumed it. You're right. This is not a very fair world.
This is I don't know. The world of Pokemon is pretty wild.
I mean,
but if we take it at face value that they do, and that battling strengthens the bond between trainer and Pokemon, and that it's all good fun for everyone involved, nobody actually gets hurt, then I'm good with it. I do really like that.
Really, the world we'd all want to live in is Animal Crossing or Stardew Valley, because it's like a perfect world.
Yeah.
I think you're just collecting bugs, you're chopping down trees, you're building your house, accessorizing. It's very relaxing.
Yeah. Can I be Spider-Man in the Spider-Man game?
Okay, you can definitely be Spider-Man if I can be Spider-Man, because I didn't even think about that. That's way better than Animal Crossing.
We could both be Spider-Man.
Both two, there's already like 3 of them, right? So
that's
true.
Fine. There's a bunch of Spider-Man.
So many Spider-Man. But yeah, thank you for the email, Kyle. Oh, wait. P.S. There's a P.S. here. You want to read that?
Yeah, the number of minutes in my title was from episode 1 till episode 160 of this fabulous podcast.
In the last email he sent us.
Oh, gotcha.
It was about the minutes, and that was the amount of minutes that we had in the podcast, it was quite a bit. Yeah, 8,547 minutes.
Wow.
That's a lot of us talking to each other.
Sure is.
And you know what? It never gets old. Aw,
True.
Okay. Here we go. Next email's from Riley. Hey, Mike and Tyler. I started listening to this show back in February and then tapered off a bit. But I have now been furiously burning through your episodes. When I noticed there was a mailbag episode, I had to binge listen from 3 to 1, and my expectations were more than exceeded. Being able to hear you display your love for video games, as well as your personal cohesion and relaxed style, was a treat. At the end of the listen through, I had a thought that came to me as I was recollection what I heard on another gaming podcast. The guys doing the show are fully credentialed sports guys, and like you two, they have amazing insight and personal connections with many a game. In one of these episodes, they discussed delayed games and how a delay can often be tied to some sort of developer issue. I know there's plenty of situations where game developers are treated great and have a positive attitude towards making a deadline. However, I've heard some not so welcoming trials and tribulations of developers who are working long, strenuous hours, suffering from poor communication and poor sleep, and probably being underpaid. Realizing there is such a range of developer work and life experiences both domestically and globally brought me to my first question. Do you have any stories of interactions with game developers? Did you notice a positive impact being felt on both ends? I would be fascinated to hear more if your answer is yes. I'm going to pause there and we can do our answer real quick. I'll do my answer. Is that okay, Tyler?
Yeah.
Jump in here? Okay. I lived briefly, when I lived in LA, I had a place that I had a lot of people moving in and out, and I was on a lease. And long story short, I had a lot of roommates there. And one of my roommates worked on, I believe, the Call of Duty Modern Warfare remake that came out in 2019. That adds up correctly, I think. And he worked on that game. And long story short, I never saw him. Pretty much is the story. Wow. He essentially lived at Infinity Ward's office where he was working. It was he did 3D modeling. I know that he designed some of the art and the models of the guns and the people in the game, which I thought was really cool. But he got paid very well. But I thought his job was so cool. I was thinking about it. I was like, oh man, he gets free breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They give him access to a gym if he wants, but they give you all that stuff so you stay. That's kind of what I was getting from. And he was there on the tail end of where, you know what? It couldn't have been actually Modern Warfare now that I think about it, because I was out of there in 2018. It was probably Black Ops 4, actually. It was Black Ops 4 was the game. But it was Treyarch, not Infinity Ward. Not to talk smack about either one of them, because truthfully, they probably both have a lot of developer troubles, you know, with that kind of crunch. But he was there all the time. He would leave the house at 6 a.m. and he'd come home at 10 or 11. No exaggeration. So it's
just to sleep, basically.
And he lived with me for 3 months, did that schedule for 3 months, got paid a ton of money. I know that. And then he left because he was a freelance contractor guy. So that's my experience of it. But I do know other developers, especially working on indie games and stuff. And there is a very positive interaction as well. Just like you say, there's a lot of indie developers that actually treat people they hire really well. If a game gets really big as an indie studio, it's they treat him really well. So, I mean, it's good and bad, but that was my experience of seeing a negative interaction. But even though he was very happy, though, he was actually liked it. So who knows? In my mind, I was like, this guy's getting worked like crazy. But in his mind, I think he liked it. And it was only 3 months long.
That's true. If he went into it knowing like he's going to work his tail off for 3 months, it's going to be a huge payday, and then afterwards he'll be able to take a long break. Like, okay, that's cool.
Yeah,
not
it's kind of
like
make
that decision, but that's cool that he was able to do that.
It's interesting because for him, video games is like when I grew up in Alaska and people would be commercial fishermen. Like they'd go for like 3 months at a time and they'd work really hard every single day, but then they'd come back with like $100,000 and not work all year. He's like that, but with video games.
There you go.
So anyway, I'm going to move on now to the next question. Okay, Tyler? Okay. So my second question is somewhat related because whether we like it or not, the lifestyle of game developers has been brought to the public eye with the most honesty via social media and modern journalism. Social media can be a beautiful way for gamers to share thoughts, collaborate, do business, and make friends. However, as we've seen from the internet can truly turn nasty. From what I've seen, politics, sports, and music seem to bring about so much gruesome and unnecessarily contention regardless of platform, although Discord probably has the best track record, so credit to them and the podcast Discord. But to avoid getting too long-winded, I'll ask my second question. What is the greatest use of social media connection between two or more gamers that you have seen? This can be any sort of connection that has happened that has made multiple parties happier, better, or more appreciative of gamers. Thank you so much, guys. Keep doing your thing, Riley. Ooh, that's a really good question. Social media interactions. Well, I've actually seen like a lot of developers like be very helpful to each other on Twitter. Mm-hmm. Like really, like if someone asks a question, you'll usually see people respond that are also developers and like give good advice. I also see developers like standing up for each other and telling them like they should stand up for themselves in situations that we talked about in that first question, like asking for more pay, what you should do for like if your company is being mean, like not mean to you, but like being unfair, like how you should handle it and that sort of advice. So in a way, I do think social media is making it, if it's used like not nasty and correctly, can actually make it better than worse.
Yeah, I agree. I also like when the Xbox and PlayStation Twitters will sometimes like say like a big game comes out, like Spider-Man came out on PlayStation 5 and like Xbox tweeted about it and they're like, we're so excited to play Spider-Man. Like, I don't know, I find that like just wholesome and fun when they're like tweeting about how they're excited to play each other's games. It's like, it's not Sega versus Nintendo anymore. We're not at each other's throats. We all just love playing video games and we're going to play each other's games. I think that's cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. We got one more email. Do you want to read Cesar's email?
Yeah. Let's see. Hello, my name is Cesar with a Z. I am new to the podcast. I've been listening to your podcast. I love it so much. One of my favorite episodes was when you guys read the Master of Doom book. The special thing about your podcast is that they are very funny and you learn interesting facts about video games as well as its origin. I hope that my email arrives in an episode with you guys, and I wish you good luck and joy. Do not stop what you like the most and enjoy doing. Here I say goodbye. Thank you, Cesar with a Z.
Yeah, thank you.
Nice thing your email, say.
It did make it in an episode.
It did. Yeah.
That's so nice of you. Thank you, Cesar. That's good. That's a nice email, you know. So if you want to send us an email, you can send us an email at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. If you want to join our Discord, you can email us and I'll send you an invite, or on my Twitter at Mecoletta, MECOLETTA. The pinned tweet at the top is the link that never expires, and you can get an invite that way too. Tyler's on Twitter also. If you want to have him and hire him to narrate your biology textbook, you could tweet at him at SneakerElf, ELPH. And with that, I think that's the episode for today. So next week, we'll do chapters 2 and 3 in the Ultimate History of Video Games, Volume 2. And one more time, too. I know I've said it a lot, but I just want to say thanks to Stephen L. Kent again for doing that interview with us. That was awesome.
Yeah, it was the last episode right before this. Go listen to it if you haven't.
Yeah.
And buy the book and read along with us.
Yeah. And that was a secret that we had to keep for so long. So I'm glad we don't have to keep that secret anymore. But with that, you want to say bye to everybody, Tyler?
Goodbye, everybody.